There are a couple of pieces in here, I think, Betty, that are really important. You know, not just talking about history education, but talking about what civic engagement means. Because it's a limited type of civic engagement. I think how many of us here are talking about civic engagement is really more about sort of fomenting revolution in some way, right? As opposed to the notion of civic engagement, you know, you should vote unless you get a letter telling you that you can't vote. You know, you should know what the 3 branches of government are. You should participate in your community by recycling and throwing out garbage and, you know, all like that level of civic engagement, as opposed to what you have on here, this idea, you say, what is an American? And I think of it more as, since it's such a loaded term, more of like, what does it mean again, coming back to the idea of citizenship as opposed to civic engagement. I think that that's the problem, is in the research that I'm doing, as disheartening as it may be, it seems that there was always, you know, we know this, there's one education for one group of people and another education for another group of people. And so it's much easier to take this broad, if we go all the way back to the 1840s and the Common School, the beginning of public education, it was about muting cultural differences and teaching a common American identity. That was its purpose. So it wasn't about necessarily participating, it was about teaching you what you need to know to not cause any trouble, in a sense, right? To be a good and passive citizen, to vote in that, to vote, that's your notion of civic engagement, for lack of a better way to put it, right? So when we talk about that idea, I think what's happening at the table is it's not just about historical literacy or illiteracy, it's about understanding what civic engagement is as we begin to tie it to history. How are we understanding that? And there's something else that I wanted to say to follow up on what Jenny was talking about, and I said this to her, is, you know, there's this notion that history is static, right? That it's just a dried up set of facts and that it has no action, that it isn't dynamic in any way. But there's also a way in which you teach history that it's very human, you know, or as I call it in my class, the Us Magazine version of history. You know, talking about George Washington marrying Martha because she was incredibly wealthy and they only met 2 times. I'm sorry if I'm destroying anybody's notions of, you know, what happened at the foundation of the country. So, I mean, there are those pieces of it, but, you know, in talking about this as well, some of it has to do with the way in which we educate our teachers. I hate to keep muddying the problem or making it more and more difficult, so I guess out of this is why you shouldn't give me free rein to talk, is this notion of understanding what we mean by civic engagement, how we're understanding it in this think tank, but how it's being promoted in a curriculum is one piece. And then, and I wrote this down, what is the role not only of teachers, but also of teacher educators, right, in making history a dynamic discipline and a necessary foundation, right? It can't just all be the responsibility of teachers who are given a state curriculum, you know, and these are the things that need to be met, and these are the things that are going to be on this exam, but also how do teacher educators work with teachers, in a sense, to change the stigma of history, but also to teach in a way that makes it dynamic, that it's not, you know, the one paragraph assigned to Reconstruction. I taught in California, so when you said 3 days on Reconstruction, I was like, we taught the colonial history up until 1850 when California was founded in 3 weeks. So Reconstruction was, the Civil War was a paragraph, and Reconstruction was a paragraph all in one day. So so I'm just saying there's a way in which we can't just leave the responsibility to teachers all alone, but also a way in which we're educating teachers of history. Actually, I guess of all of the disciplines, right? Of all of the fields. And it goes back to what you're saying, your conversations with the nursing professor. That's the same kind of conversation that needs to be had, and that's the great thing about having Luciana here, is it's like, well, I work in a bunch of different fields, but my content area is really about the importance of history just as a baseline, right? So I'll stop there, but I do want to come back to this idea of what we mean by civic engagement, if that's how history is being promoted. And in a sense, that's what this grant, you know, is saying. Well, it says a bunch of things, but we'll go with that one for now.